I enjoyed ZZ Packer's Drinking Coffee Elsewhere. After some of the recurring themes over the module of violence, survival, and resistance, the humorous tone felt refreshing. I think I want to revisit this notion of imagined or personal perception versus reality. I remember in a seminar I questioned whether Todd's fall in Ralph Ellison's Flying Home was perhaps a fall into reality, how as a child he could not distinguish between a toy aeroplane and a real one, and how this in fact left many thinking he was crazy. I feel this notion of imagination is worthy of noting in ZZ Packer's collection. One of the stories that I think highlights this is The Ant of the Self. Ray Bivens Jr. has this very optimistic outlook, with the first word of the story being him saying opportunities, and him consistently imagining his son investing money which in reality had been used to bail him out of jail. This almost becomes quite comical when placed in contrast to his son Spurgeon, whose brain naturally frowned at illogic. I think the ending of the story explores this notion of imagination versus reality greatly. When the father and son fight at the end, Spurgeon says, "You didn't know fucking Huey P. Newton. You never even went to Vietnam." Spurgeon appears exasperated by having to feed this false experience his father has manifested, yet at the end of the story, he notices how happy a young boy gets when the train conductor makes this movie-like scene of boarding a train whilst he yells "all aboard" become a reality. He is the happiest Spurgeon has seen anyone, ever. It is interesting to see how, at the end, the father is abruptly faced with reality, despite his attempts to drown it out with alcohol and delusion. And similarly, Spurgeon sees it is not entirely detrimental to allow oneself to think illogically. There was an interesting article I read in The New Yorker. In an interview, ZZ Packer says, when one is a loser, one can either frustrate oneself, which is bad, or use one's status to do what the winners cannot. Negotiate the world through the eyes of an observer. Negotiate the world with the eyes of one who is forced into wakefulness and perpetual vigilance. Or better yet, create one's own world. I think this notion of creating a world seems to resonate with me, looking not only over this collection, but the stories I have previously looked at. I think it's also interesting to ask, why must one create a new world for themselves? Or what influences the world they create or imagine up? I think that speaking in tongues is interesting to analyse in terms of these questions. I think the 14-year-old Tia Townsend is confronted with her own struggles of personal identity, of sexual repression, and of difficulty in living a teenage experience that is regulated by religion. I thought the degree of her imagination to be very thought-provoking. On page 146 we read, "She preferred the image of her mother on an anonymous street corner doing, she didn't know what her mother would be doing, to that of her mother living a real life without her." This sentence epitomizes the need for this fabricated world. Even imagining her mother working on a street corner, perhaps selling sexual services, is less painful than negotiating the very real possibility that she may have established a new life without Tia. Therefore, imagination serves, in this case, to ease the pain that may come with dealing with reality. Her imagination also is perhaps down to her immaturity, which distorts the way she perceives the much older Desi. When she meets him in McDonald's, she begins to feel conscious of the date-like scenario. It wasn't a date, but it felt like how she thought one would feel. Furthermore, after kissing Desi, she felt she had to worry about pregnancy. And further on, during a verbal altercation, it hit her. They were fighting like lovers. I think it's arguable that her naivety in these situations is partly due to her being sheltered. She has been both literally and metaphorically locked in a closet. It is interesting to note that her education and socialization is centered around religion. I personally think she perceives Desi as this almost godlike figure. When Desi initially bought her McDonald's, she had thought he meant God. For people at church, he always meant God. Yet the circumstances she finds herself in requires more than just knowledge of the Bible. She thinks to a TV documentary she watched on drug traffickers whilst her Aunt Roberta slept to help distinguish Desi's true job, and when faced with a sexual dilemma, perhaps a very teenage matter, her knowledge of sexuality is learnt through things she overheard other girls talking about in her school cafeteria. Perhaps no matter how much her Sunday school attempts, in what I felt to be a comical and cringeworthy way, to make Jesus accessible and relatable to teenage struggles, It does not provide adequate survival tools for outside her sheltered life. I think then in terms of my previous question, it might be worth considering whether she uses imagination to actually fill the gaps in her knowledge. Tia imagined coming to Atlanta to meet her mother, and although she is unsuccessful, she does meet Marie, who almost acts as a surrogate. Marie teaches her a valuable lesson in the penultimate line. She exclaims, "Run, honey, and don't let nobody lock you in no closet no more."